Overthinking is often treated like a personal flaw. Something you need to fix, suppress, or feel ashamed of. You're told to calm down, to stop thinking so much, to be more positive, to be more present, as if your mind is broken or defective. But what if overthinking isn't your fault at all? What if it's not a weakness, but a conditioned response to the way you've learned to survive in the world? Buddhism offers a perspective that feels deeply relieving once you truly understand it. It doesn't accuse the mind. It doesn't fight thoughts. Instead, it explains why the mind behaves the way it does, and why so many people feel trapped inside their own heads. Let's start with something very human. Think about how overthinking usually shows up. It's rarely about joy. It appears when there's uncertainty. When something matters. When you're afraid of making the wrong choice, disappointing someone, losing control, or being hurt again. Overthinking is the mind trying to protect you. It scans the past for mistakes and the future for threats, hoping that if it analyzes enough, it can prevent pain. From a Buddhist perspective, this is not failure. This is conditioning. The Buddha taught that the mind is shaped by habit, not intention. Most of us were never taught how to relate to our thoughts. We were taught to prepare, anticipate, defend, and optimize. We were rewarded for thinking ahead, predicting outcomes, and avoiding mistakes. Over time, the mind learns one lesson very well: thinking equals safety. So when life feels unstable, the mind does what it was trained to do: it thinks more. Imagine someone who grew up needing to be emotionally alert all the time. Maybe they had to read the mood in a room, anticipate conflict, or avoid disappointing others. That person's mind becomes sharp, fast, and vigilant. Later in life, when there's no real danger, the habit remains. The body relaxes, but the mind doesn't know how to stop scanning. Overthinking isn't happening because something is wrong with you, it's happening because something once worked. Buddhism calls this attachment to mental activity. Not attachment to objects or people, but attachment to thinking itself. The belief that if you stop thinking, something bad will happen. That silence equals danger. That answers must be forced, not allowed. This is why telling someone who overthinks to just stop never works. The mind isn't noisy by accident. It's noisy because it believes it has a job to do. And until you understand that job, you'll keep fighting yourself instead of freeing yourself. Another key insight from Buddhism is this: you are not your thoughts. This sounds simple, almost cliché, until you actually observe it. Thoughts arise on their own. You don't choose the next thought before it appears. It simply shows up. Then another. Then another. Overthinking happens when the mind identifies with each thought and treats it as urgent, true, and personal. Picture this: you're lying in bed at night, replaying a conversation from earlier that day. One thought says, "I shouldn't have said that." Another says, "They probably think I'm stupid." Then the mind escalates: "This always happens. I ruin everything." None of these thoughts asked for permission. They arrived automatically. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins not with the thought, but with the grasping. The moment you believe the thought is you, and here's where compassion enters the picture. Buddhism doesn't shame you for grasping. It says, of course you do. You were never taught another way. If this explanation is already shifting how you see your own mind, take a moment to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps this message reach people who may be blaming themselves for something that was never their fault. There's another layer that deepens this understanding even more. Buddhism explains that overthinking is fueled by craving and aversion: craving certainty, control, reassurance; aversion to discomfort, uncertainty, and emotional pain. The mind thinks because it wants something to resolve, or something to go away. Overthinking is the mind saying, "I don't want this feeling. I want clarity now." But life doesn't always offer immediate clarity. And the mind, when denied resolution, panics. So it loops, repeats, replays. Not because it enjoys suffering, but because it's resisting the present moment. What Buddhism gently points out is this: the present moment is rarely the problem. The resistance to it is, and once you see that, something important shifts. Overthinking stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a signal. A signal that something inside you is afraid, uncertain, or seeking safety. Not broken. Not weak. Just human. One of the most comforting and confronting ideas in Buddhism is this: the mind overthinks because it believes it can control life through thought. Not because it actually can, but because the illusion of control feels safer than uncertainty. From a Buddhist lens, suffering doesn't come from pain itself. It comes from clinging. Clinging to outcomes. Clinging to identities. Clinging to the idea that if you think long enough, plan carefully enough, replay enough scenarios, you can guarantee safety. Overthinking is the modern expression of that clinging. Notice how overthinking always revolves around what might happen or what should have happened. Very rarely does it stay with what is. The mind jumps forward or backward because the present moment feels exposed. In the present, there are no guarantees. In thought, there's the illusion of preparation. Buddhism calls this the illusion of control. Not in a dismissive way, but in a deeply compassionate one. The Buddha recognized that the mind seeks control because it fears impermanence. Everything changes. Relationships change. Bodies age. Emotions shift. Certainty dissolves. And the mind, unable to accept this fluidity, tightens its grip on thinking as a way to stabilize what cannot be stabilized. This is why people who overthink often feel exhausted but still unable to stop. The mind is working overtime trying to freeze a moving reality. It's like trying to hold water in your hands by squeezing harder. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips away. Think about a moment when you were waiting for an answer, a message, a decision, a result. Notice how the mind behaves. It doesn't rest. It imagines outcomes, rehearses conversations, prepares for disappointment, fantasizes about relief. None of this changes the outcome. But it creates the feeling of doing something. And that feeling temporarily reduces anxiety. Temporarily, Buddhism teaches that this temporary relief is what reinforces overthinking. The mind learns, when I think more, I feel slightly less helpless. So it repeats the behavior. Over time, this becomes automatic. Not because you choose it, but because the mind has been conditioned to equate thinking with survival. Here's where many people misunderstand Buddhism. They assume it demands detachment, passivity, or indifference. In reality, it asks for something much braver: acceptance of uncertainty. Not resignation, acceptance. The willingness to sit with not knowing without immediately trying to solve it. This is incredibly difficult in a culture that rewards certainty and speed. We're praised for having answers, plans, opinions. Rarely are we praised for presence. So when Buddhism says, you don't need to control every outcome, the mind resists. It says, if I let go, everything will fall apart. But Buddhism doesn't ask you to let go all at once. It invites you to observe. To notice that despite all the thinking you've done in your life, the most important events still unfolded in their own way. Love arrived unexpectedly. Loss came uninvited. Opportunities appeared without planning. Life happened, not because you controlled it, but because you were part of it, and slowly, a deeper insight forms. Overthinking isn't preventing pain. It's postponing peace. This doesn't mean you stop planning or reflecting. Buddhism is not anti-thought. It's anti-identification. The problem isn't thinking, it's believing that thinking is who you are and what keeps you safe. A powerful Buddhist practice is simply noticing the urge to think without immediately obeying it. Not stopping the thought. Not judging it. Just seeing it. The mind is trying to control again. That single moment of awareness creates space. And space is where freedom begins. If this perspective is helping you see your overthinking with more compassion instead of frustration, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It supports content that encourages understanding rather than self-blame. In the next part, we'll explore what Buddhism actually suggests instead of overthinking, not as a technique to suppress thoughts, but as a way to relate to the mind differently, so clarity arises naturally instead of being forced. Buddhism doesn't promise to silence your mind. It offers something far more realistic and far more liberating: a new relationship with your thoughts. The goal is not to stop overthinking, but to stop suffering because of it. One of the most misunderstood ideas in Buddhism is mindfulness. Many people think it means emptying the mind or staying calm at all times. In truth, Mindfulness is simply the practice of seeing clearly. Seeing thoughts as events, not commands. Seeing emotions as movements, not identities. When you overthink, mindfulness doesn't say go away. It says, I see you. This shift alone can change everything. The moment you stop fighting your thoughts, they lose some of their power. Overthinking feeds on resistance. The more you try to shut it down, the louder it becomes. Buddhism understood this long before modern psychology confirmed it. What you resist, persists. What you observe, transforms. There's a quiet relief that comes when you realize you don't need to solve every thought that appears. Some thoughts are just mental weather, passing clouds in a sky that was never damaged by them. Overthinking becomes painful only when you believe every cloud is a storm you must survive. Buddhism teaches the practice of returning to the body. When the mind spins, the body is always in the present. The feeling of breath. The weight of your feet on the ground. The subtle rhythm of your chest rising and falling. These are not techniques to distract you. They are anchors that remind the mind, you are here now, and in this moment, you are safe. Think of a time when you were completely absorbed in something simple, walking, cooking, listening to rain, watching the sunset. Notice how overthinking fades in those moments. Not because the problems disappeared, but because attention returned to what is real. Buddhism doesn't say problems don't matter. It says suffering multiplies when attention abandons the present. Another powerful insight is non-judgment. Overthinkers are often harsh with themselves. Why am I like this? Why can't I just relax? Buddhism replaces that judgment with curiosity. What is this thought trying to protect me from? What fear is underneath this loop? When you approach the mind with kindness, it softens. When you approach it with aggression, it defends itself. And here's something deeply important: clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from thinking less urgently. When urgency dissolves, wisdom emerges. Many of the best decisions in life arrive not during analysis, but during stillness, in the shower, on a walk, in silence. Buddhism doesn't rush answers because it trusts that truth reveals itself when the mind stops interfering. If this message has helped you see a different path forward, this is a meaningful moment to support the channel. Subscribe and leave a like. It helps create more content that speaks to the inner experience so many people struggle with in silence. Over time, as this relationship with the mind deepens, overthinking naturally loosens. Not because you forced it, but because the mind no longer feels like it has to protect you through constant analysis. You learn that uncertainty is survivable. That feelings pass. That thoughts don't define you, and one day, you notice something subtle. The mind still thinks, but it no longer traps you. There is space around the thoughts. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Space to live. That is what Buddhism offers. Not control. Not perfection. But freedom, quiet, grounded, and compassionate. Overthinking was never your fault, and now, it no longer has to be your prison.